This is tough. I've been watching. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give it up for Roland Martin. And I mean, really, because you know there's a scripture in the Bible that says every movement needs a Baruch. And that's the person who writes and who makes sure that the message actually gets out. So tonight, as we come here and we have the nation online and we thank the NAACP and those millennials, weren't they powerful? And the former panel, we really ask God's blessings and grace on us to stand strong in this moment, And Pastor, I just want to read a little something, and I want to read it in the Millennial version of the Bible. And I want to use it as a launching pad for tonight. It reads like this. Don't know if you've ever heard it before, but it says, I'm angry. Ezekiel chapter 2 says, I'm angry. God says, I'm angry because your priests are violating my law and desecrating my holy things. Your politicians have become like wolves, prowling and killing and taking whatever they want. And your preachers are covering up for the politicians by pretending to have received visions and revelations. They say, this is what God says, and I, God, have not said a thing. And because your politicians are like wolves and your preachers are covering up for your politicians, extortion is rife, robbery is epidemic, the poor and the needy are being abused, and the immigrants and the strangers are being kicked around at will with no access to justice. I looked around for somebody to stand in the gap against all of this, and I could not find anyone. Our brothers and sisters, in this moment, I believe, Roland, that we've got to be clear that it's movement time again. Tonight, we're going to hear, the nation will hear from Donald Trump at the State of the Union. But any political leader must be judged not by the teleprompter words that they say, but by the policies they embrace and advocate. A tree is known, a president is known, a Congress is known by the fruit it bears. I said, Roland and I often texting, and I was texting a few weeks ago when everybody got all upset about the profane word that the president used in a meeting. And I said to folk, well, that's profanity, but it's not cursing. The Bible, whenever it speaks of cursing, is talking about policies that hurt the least of these. Is a form of cursing. That's what cursing is. And then somebody got really upset about the porn star. And I said, well, that's something serious, and that's between him, his God, his wife, and his family, and those kinds of things have built-in consequences. But in the Bible, there's a greater adultery because it has a greater impact on more people. And in Hosea and Amos and throughout the scripture, it's called a whoring after other gods. It is when one does everything you can to be against justice and against the poor and against the least of these. And you use power to inflict pain on the most vulnerable. I would surmise that we have a lot of cursing going on in policy. I would surmise that not just Trump, but this extremist Congress that I believe really likes his tweets and his antics because they never separate from his agenda. So they let him be a distraction, and they want us to follow the distractions, while underneath the distractions, they are deconstructing the American project. And the question for us now is not, can the Democratic Party survive or the Republican Party? I'm an independent. I've been one for a long time. The question is America possible? Is America possible? We would do well in this moment, because anytime you're in a moment like this, your analysis must be deep. It can't be shallow. It can't be from the hip. It can't be naive. We would do well to remember that the leadership of every white supremacy campaign in the U.S. history has called for peace and law and order. Every campaign rooted in racism and classism has claimed that what they were doing was good for the economic health of the nation, and that there would be some trickle-down effect from the stock market or the wealth rising at the top. The same con has been used by every oppressive cover-up. That's one lesson the nation needs to stop saying we've never seen this before. If you know history and world history, we've seen it and we are seeing it. My brothers and sisters, I believe, are in the midst of a third reconstruction in America. We are in the midst of the fundamental changing of demographics around the world. And until we began to understand this, and how extreme policy in America today is driven by a fear of the browning and blackening of this nation's demographics, and the possibility of that black and brown growing demographic aligning with progressive whites to build a fusion that embraces every creed, every color, every class, and every sexuality and every gender. Until we understand that, we will not clearly see why so-called America First enthusiasts are willing to work so hard and cheat so much to undermine the basic tenets of the American democracy. For instance, Trump and Putin are not connected by political party. What binds them goes much deeper: white hegemony and white nationalism that is strengthened by enormous wealth. And when I say a third reconstruction, I first want us to understand, in American history where we are right now, one of the problems of the way we do American analysis is too often, and Roland and I talk about this all the time, is we act as though there's not a past connected to the present. As Dr. Painter at Princeton said, all you're seeing now is the call and response of American history. She calls it the iconography of a very familiar process in the American stream of history. For instance, right after slavery was over, there was a period called the Reconstruction in the South, where blacks and poor whites came together and changed this nation. They rewrote all the constitutions in the South. They took over every Southern legislature, black and poor white folk, free and former slaves and poor whites. When they took office and took power with the movement, the Reconstruction movement, they rewrote the constitutions. They guaranteed voting for all men. They didn't do women yet, but for all men. They rewrote the criminal justice laws, black and white. They guaranteed public education as a right in state constitution. I'm not talking about 1968. I'm talking about 1868. Black and white. They sent black senators from the South to Washington, D.C., and congressmen. Almost every Southern legislature was controlled either by a majority black legislative body or a majority black-white fusion. They began to talk about guaranteeing a living wage, 1868. They pushed the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, the 15th Amendment, the voting rights. By 1875, we passed a law outlawing discrimination. There was talk of Frederick Douglass becoming president. No, I'm not talking about in 1988. I'm talking about in 1878 and 68, in that time. But during that period of time when the aristocracy, the white aristocracy that used to be the former owners of the slaves, saw this power of black and white fusion coming together, they could not stand it. And by 1872, the Ku Klux Klan was founded, not at first to challenge black people, but to challenge white people who were working with black people. And then in 1877, we had a presidential election. There's a lot of history. I'm not going to do it all. But in 1877, we had an election, and a president lost the popular vote. In 1877, his name was Rutherford B. Hayes. He lost the popular vote, but was put in office through the Electoral College. And he promised those that gave him the Electoral College, if you will give me the Supreme Court and the federal courts, then we'll put you in office. And by 1883, the Civil Rights Act of 1865 was overturned. And there was only one vote on the Supreme Court that did it. It was a white man from Kentucky named Justice Harlan. And he was the same only white man that voted against Plessy versus Ferguson. By 1896, you had Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. 1898, you had the Wilmington riots in North Carolina that sent a signal of how to put black people back in their place. Black voting went down because of Jim Crow laws. Yesterday was the anniversary of the last African-American, George White, being put out of the United States Congress in 1901. And another one didn't return from North Carolina until 1990. 1914, Woodrow Wilson gets elected, had been president of Princeton and governor. He gets elected. He plays Birth of a Nation in the Oval Office. Birth of a Nation, 100 years before Bannon. He put white supremacy in the Oval Office and that celebrated the Klan and said that black and white fusion movements would destroy this country. And in 1919, the statue that they marched around in Charlottesville was commissioned, that Confederate statue, not to honor the Confederacy, but to honor the return of white supremacy to the law as the law of the land, and to honor Woodrow Wilson. And then there was a second reconstruction in the 1960s, beginning in 1954 with the Brown decision. And then you saw the rise of the civil rights movement, black and white and brown coming together, and Jew and Gentile, as Dr. King said. And we began to see push. Social Security was opened up to black and brown people in 1954 because it wasn't open to people in the agrarian culture and in the domestic culture in 1935 when it was first passed. Many programs that had been open only to whites suddenly began to be opened up to black and brown people, and all of a sudden they became dangerous entitlements. You get the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, as Roland was just saying. And this is coming because of a fusion black movement that is beginning to shift. And at that time, they didn't even shift necessarily who was in office. They shifted the context that the people in office had to operate in and force people to vote in ways they weren't intending to vote. But because there was a movement, because parties are not going to build a movement. I just thought I'd say that out here. You're not going to get a movement from the parties. There has to be a movement that pushes the parties. Right? And then you had something around 1968 come in called the Southern Strategy. And the Southern Strategy was, how can we use the politics of George Wallace without the N-word? And how can we make black and white people be against each other, the ones that really need to be allies, poor and hurting, black and white? How can we separate them? And how can we target 13 southern states from Virginia to Texas so that we can control 13 states? Now, I know some of you say, well, 13 states, what difference does that make? Well, if you control 13 states from Virginia to Texas, you control 171 electoral votes. Now, you only need 270 to get elected president. So if you control 171 with just 13 states, you only need 99 from the other 37 states. And then if you can play that game in the Rust Belt a little bit, and in the Bible, in the Wheat Belt, and then some of the enclaves in the North, pitting people against one another who ought to be allies, then you can control, they believe, you can control elections for another 50 years. And the Southern Strategy started in 1968. And this is the 50th year. You better hear what I'm saying, America. And the goal was to not, you can't be Wallace, you can't be outright racist, you can't use racist words, right? But Kevin Phillips told Nixon, I'm going to teach you a new way to talk. I want you to talk about entitlement reform and racialize that and basically say to poor and other white folk that because of these entitlements, the very entitlements that they use the most of, but because of these entitlements and black folk getting money and brown folk getting money from the entitlement, that's why you're poor. So entitlement reform, forced busing, states' rights. And then Lee Atwater said, we even got more sophisticated than that. We started talking about tax reform. And he said it didn't sound racist, it sounded economics. But the byproduct of it is black and brown people got hurt worse than other people because of the policies out of this that came from this language. But also, it blinded the eyes of many of our white brothers and sisters not to see that they would be voting against their own self-interest. Huh? And the 50th year is this year. And if you understand that history, then you understand that how we come to a Trump. And that Trump is not the problem. Trump is a symptom of a deeper moral malady. And Trump is a symptom, and not just him, McConnell and Ryan are symptoms that something has happened in the ethos of the political atmosphere of this nation, where the majority of folk in the media can't even see how this stuff is being played out, how it's being used to manipulate the mind. And so so in the 50th year of the Southern Strategy, you get another president who loses by 3 million votes. You can't certify that election. Loses by 3 million votes, right? Wins the whole South for the most part, and the Rust Belt and the Wheat Belt. Loses by 3 million votes. Wins by what they say 80,000 votes gave him the Electoral College. And in Wisconsin, for instance, where he so-called won by 30,000 votes, there were 250,000 suppressed black votes. So you have somebody in office who has not won, but the system, the Southern Strategy, has worked just like it worked in 1877. And that he is a symptom of a deeper malady. And so, my brothers and sisters, when we look at this, how do you treat the real issue, the problem that's really there of what's going on? I believe that we are in the middle of a third reconstruction. And people wouldn't be fighting this hard if we were weak. I'm not just talking about black people. I'm talking about the possibility of a whole new electorate rising. And I think that's what really scared people. It wasn't President Obama. It was the electorate that came together that exposed the breakages in the solid South, that exposed the possibility of black and brown people and red people and all that coming together and create a new elect. And that's why on day one, they said, because Trump didn't just get elected because of what happened in 2016, Trump is the result, and many people in the Congress, of what's been planned for years. The voter suppression and the voter gerrymandering and the not having statehood in Washington, D.C. All of this is a part of. And so I said tonight to myself, what scripture could help us? And I came to that Ezekiel 22. Your politicians are like wolves. God said, I can't even describe them in human terms. What they're doing, the way they're hurting poor people, is almost animalistic. And I thought about when you take health care from poor people so you can give tax breaks to the greedy, that's devouring the poor. It says your politicians are like wolves who devour the poor. That's devour. In fact, when you pass a tax plan that takes more money from the backs of poor and working poor people than the cost or what they call the receipt price of slaves in 1863. $3 trillion is the transfer of more. You have to go all the way back to slavery to understand that level of wealth transfer. And that's what just happened. And sadly, Pastor, even in the Congress, Democrats and Republicans talked about the middle class. They did not talk about how the racist impact of this budget or the class impact of this budget or how it's hurting poor people. Devouring. When you spread lies about voter fraud and you enact laws that suppress the votes of poor people. Since 2010, we've had 23 states to engage in voter suppression. 23 states. The Brennan Institute says there are about 12 to 16 seats in the Congress that wouldn't even be in the party they're in if it wasn't for racialized gerrymandering. We won a case in North Carolina where the Supreme Court, even Clarence Thomas had to vote and say it was surgical racism. But when you pass voter suppression laws, that is devouring the poor in a democracy. When you lock more and more black and brown and poor whites up, while at the same time you cut money for education, that is devouring the poor. When you rob DACA students of their dreams, and be careful, be real clear, black folk, black people have no business being against our Latino brothers and sisters for two reasons. Number one, Mexico was anti-slavery before America. They need to understand that. And number two, we can't agree to anything that would say we'll give the DACA students their immigration as long as the DACA students allow us to attack all the other immigrants. We already been through that. It's called the house Negro versus the field Negro. We don't play that game, and we can't allow that to be played. Something is wrong when we pit students against sick children that need insurance. That's devouring the poor. When companies are deregulated and they pull out of climate accords, that's devouring the earth and devouring the poor. And the poor always suffer first from ecological devastation. When we right now are providing 53 cents of every discretionary dollar to the military-industrial complex, 53 cents, that's devouring the poor. Right now, 50 years after Dr. King's death, there are 40 million people in extreme poverty, 47 million. 22 million of them are white. 22 million of them are white, more whites than blacks in extreme poverty in terms of raw numbers, not percentage of their rate. There are over 140 million poor people in this nation right now. People who work every day, 62 million people who work every day of their life, sometimes 50 hours, and make less than a living wage right now. And 54% of African Americans who work and make less than a living wage. That is policies that are devouring the poor. But then Ezekiel says something else. He says your preachers cover up for the politician. And we must be clear today that there's always been a cover-up as far back as Pharaoh and his false preacher magicians and the false prophets that challenged Jeremiah and Isaiah and the slave preacher that would preach about heaven on Sunday and then enslave black bodies on Monday through Sunday. There's always been false prophets. The ones that stood up against Dr. King, They've always been. And what we must be clear today, that there is a brand of Christian nationalism that will praise the wolves while they devour the poor. And whenever these things line up, an attack on voting rights, an attack on wealth and money, living wages, attack on unions, attack on education, whenever we see the call for massive tax cuts, and also the attempt to use religion to cover up hate and injustice and racism, whenever those things line up, you are in the middle of a reconstruction of America. And the question is, will we reconstruct it or deconstruct it? And that's why, my brothers and sisters, if we understand that, we can't allow the cover-up. We must speak up, stand up, and vote up like never before. I'm telling you, it's movement time in America. And there are three things, and I'm through, I believe, Roland, we have to have in this moment. And I'm not talking party, I'm talking movement. First, we must have a movement, direct action, and civil disobedience campaign. A massive, I believe this, it took mass civil disobedience in the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction. And this mass civil disobedience is not about saving a party, but about changing the moral narrative. When people can run for office and look you in your eye and say, elect me and I'll take your votes and rights. Elect me and I'll snatch your health care away. Elect me and I won't even vote for you to have a living wage. I mean, tell you right up front. That's not a political problem alone. That's a deep moral issue. Huh? And there are 5 areas that I believe, and we believe in our movement, that interlock. They're interlocking. Somebody say interlocking. Interlocking. They're interlocking injustices. Systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism and white evangelicalism. Those 5 issues, they hook together. And you can't separate one from the other. You can't address racism without addressing systemic poverty. You can't address poverty and have some kind of neoliberal critique that doesn't address racism. You can't do one without the other. They connect together. And we must have a massive civil disobedience movement of all different kinds of people, and we must go to the places of power, not just outside and away, but in the very halls of power. I'm talking about in Ryan's office, and in McConnell's office, and in state capitals. Ezekiel said, who will stand in the gap? Jeremiah 22 says, I need you to go down to the king's house and demand that they stop hurting the poor and stop hurting the immigrant and stop hurting the vulnerable. And we must have moral leaders and impact. But I'm not talking about building a stage for somebody to come and speak on behalf of impacted people, but impacted people having the stage themselves. And so from Mother's Day to June 21st, which is the anniversary of Swanner, Trainer, and Goodman being killed, we are starting the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, not in commemoration of what happened 50 years ago, but launching a multi-year movement. It will be direct action, civil disobedience, power training, how to build power, and voter mobilization in 32 state capitals and the District of Columbia. And it's going to be rooted, not just people being angry, but 6 weeks rooted in an agenda. So people are clear about what we stand for. And the first week and the first Monday of action will focus on children and women in poverty, because 72% of those in poverty are children and women. And then secondly, and then lastly, we need a movement with a determined agenda. You cannot just be angry at Trump. You really think if we get rid of Trump, Pence is better? Trump is just a symptom. You can't just fight Trump. In fact, right now, you don't want to just fight Trump. We got a mid-year election we're dealing with. And if you want to change it, we've got to change the Congress. But you can't just fight Trump. We need a movement that says we're not just angry at the symptom. We're here to push for living wages. We're here to push for empowerment zones. We're here to challenge the criminal justice system. We want full restoration of the Voting Rights Act so that these people cannot continue. We continue to implement voter suppression. We want not the Affordable Care Act. We want that and universal health care for every person. We want just immigration. We want that. We want correction in our criminal justice system. We want, Dr. King said, if you're not willing to fight for a guaranteed income from the poor, you might as well stop talking about dealing with poverty. He said because the issue is not scarcity of wealth, it's the scarcity of will. And then we need defined movement voter mobilization. Let me say this. Did you know that if we just changed 10 to 12% of the voter turnout in a mid-year election, if it just went up 10% beyond norm, you can override some of this voter suppression. Just 10%, not 20%. Did you know, as I said in Wisconsin, that 250,000 votes were suppressed? Did you know that down in Alabama, yes, Roy Moore was beaten by about a percentage point, but there were thousands of people stayed home. There are thousands of people not registered. Do you know if you registered 30% of the unregistered black voters in the 13 southern states, and then they connected with progressive whites and Latinos, that you could flip North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Texas tomorrow? And do you know if you vote like that, and then as Roland said, and then hold people accountable, don't just vote, but show your power and then hold them accountable with your power. So I believe that one of the things we have to do, and if we mobilize this 140 million poor and working poor people, and see, a lot of them aren't voting because they never hear their name or their issue. Think about it. We went through 26 presidential debates, Democrat and Republican, and we didn't have 1 hour on poverty. Think about it. Not 1 hour on poverty, not 1 hour on systemic racism. Not one presidential candidate was asked, if you get elected, will you fight for full restoration of the Voting Rights Act? And we have less voting rights today than we had August 6, 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was first passed. We didn't have 1 hour on the war economy. We didn't have 1 hour. We were talking about innuendos and text messages and women in the back room and all that kind of stuff. We have to change the very moral narrative. And it's not going to be changed from the party. They're still talking about white working class. That's all they're talking about, like they in the black working class. I mean, come on. We need a movement that forces a new agenda. And then we need to have this massive, directed, defined voter mobilization. I believe we have to vote for at least the next 6 years, starting this year, like they voted the first year in South Africa. You remember how they were? They were standing everywhere. They were everywhere. Touch your neighbor and say everywhere. And we've got to stop fighting each other and start fighting extremism. And we've got to recognize that the people and the extremists, I don't call them Republicans, I call them extremists because my granddaddy was a Republican, but he was a Lincoln Republican. He was a Teddy Roosevelt Republican. I call them extremists. But whether it's extremists on the Republican side or the scared folk on the Democratic side, whoever they are, we have to stop fighting each other and fight racism and sexism and xenophobia. And we got to understand, if they can come together for the love of money, and what you're finding out is they don't have to agree all the time to come together. Sometimes we make the mistake. We got to have 99.9% agreement. But we have found out that these mean folk, they will come together for the love of money, won't they? Trump can talk about their mama, but as long as he signs a tax bill, they'll come together. And I stopped by to tell you, if they are cynical enough to come together, we better be smart enough to come together. And come together for love and justice. And it's time for us to come together around this broad agenda. And it's got to be everybody. Now, how you know you got to come together? Because the Bible told me so. You see, in the 22nd chapter of Ezekiel, since we're in a church tonight, God said, I looked for somebody to stand in the gap, and I could not find anybody. The chapter ends in a miserable way. But then 15 chapters later, in the 37th division of Ezekiel, God says to Ezekiel, I know where you can find somebody to beat back the wolves. I know where you can find a group of people that will beat back the lying preachers. But you got to go down in the valley of dry bones. In other words, you got to go down in that place they call the shithole. I mean, you got to go down there. And if you go down there, you're going to find some bones down there. Now, I know they look like bones. They look like dry bones. They look like the wolves have torn them apart. But they are the people down there. And these bones in the valley, they represent the bruised and the battered and the beaten down and the oppressive by the oppressive forces of the world. They are the people who've injustice, look like injustice has won. They are the people whose spirit and life has been taken out of them by the constant battering of the language and the actions of hate and injustice. Dry bones. Those who are poor, who have been told their poverty is their own fault. Dry bones, children among us who've been discounted and criminalized because of the color of their skin and the economic location. Dry bones, the sick who have heard mean politicians declare that giving people health care is un-American and a form of communism. Dry bones, the workers that are beaten down by the battering rams of anti-union forces and corporate greed. Dry bones, the immigrants who've been called aliens and vilified in a land of immigrants where people want to put rules in place now that their own great-great-grandmama couldn't have passed if they were trying to come in now. The dry bones are the gay people and the transgender people who've been told in so many ways that they're hated and that God doesn't love them and neither does America. The dry bones, African Americans who see mean and power-drunk politicians working to take away their voting rights. Dry bones, people who have voted for people time and time again, but then those people turn their backs on them once they get into office. Dry bones. There are dry bones lying all around, but God says to Ezekiel, that's your army. That's the army. Those dry bones that are down there. And they might look like they're dry and they might look like they're dead, but dry bones still have ears. And if you'll go down in the valley and preach to the dry bones, then those dry bones will come together. I'm telling you, I've been preaching to the dry bones. I went out to Seattle among the homeless white folk, and there's a young girl out there that said, Reverend Barber, I'm joining the movement because I'm the white trash that they threw out but forgot to burn. Lord have mercy. I went down to El Paso and the immigrants down in Texas. We walked in the middle of the Rio Grande River, and they're joining the movement. I went to the Apache Nation and sat in the middle of the circle and played the drums and sat there with the elders and the 500 Apache nations have been sending out the cry that it's time for us to come together. Went with the national welfare rights workers in California and Detroit, and those welfare rights workers that were part of the original Poor People's Campaign, some of them are 60 and 70 years old. They said, we ready for one more battle. Went down to Alabama, and there's a mother whose girl died in her arms because Alabama did not expand Medicaid expansion. And she said, my baby didn't die for anything. I'm ready to march. I'm ready to stand up. I'm ready to I wonder, are there any dry bones in here? Are there any poor folk? Are there some poor bones in here? Can I get one to come down here? Can I get a poor bone to come down here? Can I get somebody that needs a living wage to come down here? Can I get a woman to come down? I mean, really, come down here. Is there a bone in the house? Is there a bone in the house? Are there some millennial bones in the house? Are there some folk that fought back in the 60s, but you got one more fight in you? Are there any white folk in here that know we got to build coalition? Come on down here. Come on down here. Are there any gay bones in here down here? Are there any straight bones down here? Anybody that needs health care or you know somebody needs health care, you better come on down here because this the army. Anybody that works hard every day but you don't make a living wage, come on down here. Anybody that wants more education for your children, come on down here. Come on down here. Any brothers that the system did you wrong and locked you up, but they should have kept you because now that you're out, you're going to fight. Look, I'm telling you, will the dry bone just hook up a little bit? Because they tell me in the valley that the foot bone connected to the ankle bone. You know what I'm saying? And the ankle bone connected to the knee bone. What I'm trying to say is when the black and the white and the brown and the red and the yellow and the Christian and the Muslim and the Sikh and the Hindu and the Jewish and the gay and the straight and the southerner and the northerner, when all these dry bones get together, they tell me there'll be a shaking in the valley. There's going to be a shaking on Capitol Hill. There's going to be a shaking on Capitol Hill. There's going to be a shaking in state capitals, and we are going to make the third reconstruction a reality, and we're not going to give up on the American project. Too many tears have been cried. Too much blood has been shed, and the dry bones are right. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. And this army will be able to break every chain. Let's go out and come up from the valley. The last thing they should have called us was shithole, because we know how to take that stuff and make fertilizer and build a new movement.
Amen.
Give it up, y'all.